everyone, and welcome to the Squad Room Podcast, the place for cops who want to transform their leadership, create more resilience, and generate more balance in their life. On this show, we cover the tactics and strategies you can use every day to create a life worth living both in and out of uniform. My name is Garrett Teslaw, and I'm a full-time lieutenant for a sheriff's office in Southern California, and I'm glad you're with us today. Before we get to our guest, I want to remind you of a few things. First, if you're on social media, make sure you're following us at The Squad Room and that you've liked our Facebook page. Also, make sure to join our Facebook group. Just search the Squad Room group to join. But most importantly is that you head over to thesquadroom.net and get signed up for our mailing list. People on that list get exclusive access to free resource downloads and a weekly email from me on things you need to know about. I also send out content that's exclusive to that list, so don't miss out on something that can help you in your life or in your job. Join our list at thesquadroom.net. I recently had an experience that made me so thankful to have officerprivacy.com as a partner in keeping my family safe. Like many of you, I'm often tasked with handling media inquiries around newsworthy events that my agency is involved in. We had an anti-government and anti-police group that got some media attention recently, and my name was out there in the papers as our spokesman on the issue. It turned out that some of the agitators don't live very far from me. It was a troubling reminder I'm often confronted with, one that is made worse because I live in the area where I also work. It's not uncommon for me to encounter people at the grocery store, the gas station, or the gym that I've had some sort of professional interaction with. I'm constantly reminded of how easy it is to be exposing my family to the dangers of my job, and how easy it is to find information about me on the internet. So on the same day that my name was out there in the papers and on the internet about this anti-police group, I got my regular report from officerprivacy.com. The report showed me how they're monitoring the top 50 people search sites on the web to make sure that my information is deleted and stays deleted from these sites. They wipe your information from sites like LexisNexis and Spokeo, White Pages, and many more. OfficerPrivacy.com offers 2 packages to choose from to help you clean up your side of the internet. Their premium service allows you to sit back and let the professionals do the work where they will scrub the internet's top 50 people search sites that can expose your home address. They then work to maintain your privacy by monitoring those same sites. If you show up again, they'll remove you again. They also offer an at-home solution for those of you that have the time and the technical ability. Using their proprietary software, you can remove yourself and your family members from those same top 50 people search sites on the internet, and then use the software to conduct audits as often as you'd like to make sure that you haven't been added back. To learn more about how they can keep you safe, check them out at officerprivacy.com/thesquadroom. When you sign up through that link, you'll get 2 free months of monitoring and data removal, plus a free cell phone privacy device when you sign up. You know, whether you're the chief, a sergeant, a patrol officer, or anyone in between, one of the most time-consuming and frustrating parts of managing people is dealing with the schedule. From shift bids to overtime and special events, vacation requests, court overtime, and unexpected critical incidents and major disasters, the schedule is like a living, breathing beast that must be wrestled with at every level of an agency. If your agency is still living in the dark ages, running off an Excel spreadsheet, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's why I'm so impressed with InTime. InTime is designed specifically for public safety agencies, from police and sheriff's offices to corrections, dispatch, and fire agencies. Their cloud-based system and their smartphone app allow officers to access the system from anywhere to sign up for overtime, submit vacation requests, and get updated on court subpoenas. Their system is incredibly easy to use and only takes a few minutes, not hours, to understand and begin using. Major agencies like the Anaheim Police Department, Pittsburgh Police, Passaic County Sheriff's Office, CAL FIRE, and many others trust InTime to save them time and money. If you're interested in spending less time on scheduling, eliminating redundant and expensive overtime, increasing your compliance with subpoenas, and reducing the stress and fatigue on your employees, please, I beg of you, go to intime.com/thesquadroom to learn more about their system. Whitney Allen, welcome to the Squad Room. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I found you, as I often do with other guests or people that I'm interested in or have something to share. I found you on Instagram, and your story was so compelling to me. And I don't want to recap it myself. Sometimes, you know, when a guest comes on, and I give them like the Reader's Digest versions of someone's life or their background or all that. And in your story, I don't want to do that. I just want to basically begin by turning over the mic to you right away and having you share your story and what brought you to the point where you even caught my attention.
Sure. So I guess I have to start October 12th, 2021. So at that time, my husband, Ryan, he was a canine officer at Hatboro Police Department. So that is a borough outside of Philadelphia. I was working as a medical malpractice defense attorney, like 9 or 10 years at that time, working in law. Our son Jackson was 3.5, and I was pregnant with our second son Leo, who I was 26 weeks pregnant. So on October 12th, 2021, Ryan and I celebrated our 8-year wedding anniversary. We had been together at that time 9 years, would have been 10 years in March. And, it's just a normal day. We had an ultrasound to see the baby, and then unfortunately 48 hours later, Ryan was coming back from the gym. It was a random day off for him because he worked, he switched night and day work, depending upon the month, so he would alternate. And it was just one of those random days he was off during the week. I think it was one of his longer weekends, so he would have worked Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so he was off Thursday. And he went to the gym, he did CrossFit, and on his way home, we still don't know exactly where he got stung or when on his way home. I think it was on his way home in the car because it was a very warm October day, on October 14th, which was 48 hours later after our anniversary. And he got stung by a bee at some point on his way home. I was home working. He came home, was totally normal. And a few minutes after he came home, he said he felt weird, and he started going into anaphylactic shock. And I knew what was happening right away because he told me that on his way home he had gotten stung. So I kind of just knew what was going on. I called 911, and he went unconscious on our front porch, and I did chest compressions. That's what EMS told me to do while I was waiting for the ambulance. And then at some point, when the ambulance and the EMS got there, he went into cardiac arrest, and they weren't able to start his heart for 20 minutes. So he was down on our porch, and they were bringing him to the hospital. And at some point during the ambulance ride to the hospital, they were able to start his heart. And that started a 6-month ordeal of Ryan in and out of hospitals. He was in the ICU for about 8 weeks. He was able to wean himself off of the ventilator that he was on, but he sustained a very severe anoxic brain injury. So that's when you are deprived of oxygen to your brain for a prolonged period of time. And unfortunately for Ryan, even though he was able to get out of the ICU and get off the ventilator, the damage to his brain was so extensive that parts of his brain actually died. So after 5 months, when he was in brain rehab, they did a follow-up scan, and they told us basically it would have been impossible for him to have a meaningful life with the parts of his brain that were now not there. So knowing Ryan and how stoic and courageous and strong he was, he would never want to be just a body for people to just, be around. If he were to be on this earth, he would want to be lively and be able to interact and be a father to his kids. And he wouldn't want to be in the state that he was in, just always on the edge of, having to go to the ER for medical issues and whatnot, because that's what happens when you can't move or really do anything on your own. So myself, my mother-in-law, and my sister-in-law, we decided that Ryan would want to, transition to heaven and not live the way that he was living. So we decided to put him on hospice on February of 2022, and he was transferred to hospice on March 17th, 2022, which is ironically our 10-year anniversary of meeting. We met on St. Patrick's Day 2012. And then he died 22 days later on hospice.
What an ordeal to go through, and to have such a drawn out process to it as well. And you and we'll get to what you're doing now in terms of helping others, but something I touched on before we started recording was when we're in a line of work like ours, like a canine handler or a cop. We often focus on the things that seem obvious to us about what might be the dangers or what might kill us, and it's kind of the dark cloud that is always hovering over our own families too. I mean, you have young kids, I have young kids, and I know that even for them, your kids might be young enough still to maybe not be so cognizant of it, but for me, my kids when they were growing up became more and more aware of the dangers that my job has, and that definitely contributed to stress in their life. But we don't think about, just oftentimes we don't think about the obscure things that we see at work, but we just don't think of them connecting to us. What was a canine handler? I love the canines at my department. What was the agency's uh, reaction during this time? I'm just curious about how did they manage, because I'm always curious from an organizational perspective how they were able to assist or didn't, or what you would like to uh, ask of agencies who find themselves in a similar situation where it's not a workman's comp, it's not an on-duty injury thing, but there's support that's needed for the family.
Yeah, I mean Ryan's department and also like the department itself was amazing. And then when you're a canine handler, that's a almost like a whole different family. Because they train with officers. Ryan trained at Penn. So that's where he did all his certifications. Pennsylvania University, they have a canine program. So he trained with canine officers from all around the Philadelphia area, all like the counties and townships in our area. So it was like two families kind of coming together to, help us in any way that they could through fundraising. Louis was my husband's canine. Louis was still living at home at the time. So, and he needed a lot of, attention and getting out and activity. So while we were in the hospital because we couldn't be at home because we were with Ryan, uh, there were police officers coming in our house like on a day-to-day basis, taking out Louis, taking him for walks. They did a ton of fundraisers around the time of his accident and up until the time of his death. And there was a ton of support. Like it was very overwhelming, in a good and bad way, because it's just, you like lose all social graces when you're in that situation. So it's hard to show gratitude when you're just like in survival. So it was so needed, all the support, obviously, like looking back. But it's really hard to act the way that you want to act when you're in survival. So I feel like it was just, it was like I didn't even want it because I knew what it meant, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
uh, yeah, so it's like every check that I got in the mail from like families and like it was just so beautiful. Everyone showed up for him. Ryan was so loved in the community. It was like also like a stab to my heart every time I opened a check or a card in the mail because, you don't want it for this reason. But yeah, the support was unbelievable.
That makes sense. It's a constant reminder of why you're in the situation that you're in, right? And
Yeah.
um, I wonder sometimes, you said something really interesting, that when you're in the thick of something like that and you're in basically just a response to that trauma, that you just don't have the bandwidth to show gratitude. And I think that's true, and not just in loss or in dealing with a medical emergency, but if you're just constantly exposed to a stress or a trauma too, it becomes harder and harder. You said it as survival mode, and I totally get that. It just feels like every day is a grind just to get from sundown or sun up to sunset almost. And what are the things now, with a little distance between those times and now, what are the things you use to either practice gratitude or try to open back up to the experience of just being around and maybe working yourself out of survival mode? Are you there yet?
Yeah, I am. And it is such a world of a difference because when you are so close to this tragic event, and especially the death of such a young person that is so close to you, like a spouse, um, after you come out of survival mode, it's like the exact opposite. You start to see the world differently. I feel like I have so much gratitude now, way more than I could have ever had without the loss, because you understand how fragile life is. Like life can change in an absolute instant. And it doesn't matter if you're prepared or not or what you're doing. Like it's not on your timetable when things are going to happen to you. So like ever I now I really take the time when, I'm enjoying time with my family, with my kids, doing things that I enjoy, just having those joyful moments. I mean, I really realize how wonderful the moments are, how beautiful they are, because I'm looking at it outside of the survival now. And it's so hard not to feel grateful when you're here. And it's almost like you're living for two people now instead of just
Mm.
yourself.
It's a great transition to my next question, which was in gratitude. When we truly feel grateful, it provokes joy and happiness, which are wonderful things. But in the shadow of a loss like that, especially publicly, or with maybe family members that knew you both or that were from his family, there must be a tinge of guilt at times, that you're feeling guilty about moving on, or even just the ability to feel happy. Had you ever experienced that?
Yeah. It's so hard not to feel guilty because, you ask yourself a lot of questions when, especially a spouse, because it's like your other half. So it's like I know I asked myself, like, why me? Why was it like, or why was it Ryan and not me?
Mhm.
Ryan was such a wonderful dad. And, when you're in the moment and you're seeing your spouse in pain and suffering and in the hospital and going through all these horrific things, I mean, I would have traded spaces with him in a second, like in a heartbeat. Um, so yeah, when you get out of it and you do, and you start feeling normal again, and you can have a normal life again that doesn't revolve around going to the hospital and having all this death and all of these things, and you're able to live life again, and forge this new path. It's so hard not to feel guilty because the person that you wanted to share your life with and do all these things with and be joyful with and have these happy experiences with cannot do that. So yeah, it's very difficult. But for me, I think Ryan, the way that he lived his life, he was so joyful and happy, and he was always laughing and making other people laugh. And he loved to do that. And for me, I feel like to feel guilty is almost like dishonoring him, because I know that he wouldn't want me to feel guilty for living my life because I get to do something that he can't do. Um, so, I don't know if you're religious, but for me, I believe in heaven. I believe in God. I believe that one day I'll see Ryan again. And that is so much motivation for me, because when I see him again, I don't want him to be disappointed that I didn't
Mhm.
live my life the way that I should have while I was here, because he couldn't do that.
What a wonderful way to phrase it, that you don't want him to be disappointed, and it sets you up for permission, really, right,
Hmm.
to go out and live the rest of your life and to raise your kids in a way that allows them to enjoy their lives too.
Hmm.
With you mentioned, obviously Ryan was your husband, your spouse, and you posted something I thought was really interesting, and I wanted you to help me understand a little better and walk me through it. But the differences between a primary and a secondary loss, because I thought those
Hmm.
were interesting distinctions. Can you share with us the differences there?
Yeah, sure. So, kind of put simply, a primary loss is the loss of a person. And that's kind of it. When someone dies, it's like, you do the funeral and you say goodbye, and it's like supposed to be closure for that person. But that's not the end of the losses. Like just because the person physically dies, that's one loss. But there's so many secondary losses that kind of flows from that primary loss of losing a physical person, and that the essence of a person when they're not here in because of death. And those can include loss of a co-parent, loss of like a companion, loss of a financial security, loss of a future, a shared past. These are all the things that kind of like are a snowball effect of this primary loss. So, you're not just grieving the death of a person, you're grieving the death of a future, a past, a present, like all of these things that you had planned with the person that you were with are now, in essence, dead also. And you have to create a totally new future without that person. And you also, a lot of the time, I mean, you lose your identity when you lose a spouse because, without you even trying, everyone, like when you're in a couple, it's like you and that person. Like when people think of you, they also think of your other half. Um, and so you have to learn how to live without that person and also who you are in the world without that person, which is really difficult because you are a completely different person after loss. So you have to relearn who you are, and then you have to create like a new identity from scratch, and like who am I, from the present day after the death and then in the future. And that's another secondary loss. So it's all the losses around just the primary loss of that physical person in death.
You just mentioned something I think that's really interesting, and that's creating a new identity for yourself as this new person who's post loss. And um, what are the things you had to do? I go back to this word permission, like feeling like you have to give yourself permission, or maybe feel obligated to get someone else's permission, an in law or something like that, to adapt and change. I'm curious how you reconciled that, and if there was ever any conflict between who you realized you needed to become versus who you were in the past, and that you weren't changing for something that was bad, but something that you needed a new you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's really complicated. So after Ryan died, I became certified as a certified grief educator. So I help other people now through grief and their loss. And one of the things that so many of my clients they have trouble with is, they know that they need to move forward and they want to move forward in their own authentic way that feels in alignment with them. But then they have all of this chatter around them, like all of these people saying, why don't you do it this way? Or like, why are you doing it this way? And there's so much criticism
Hmm.
from like the peanut gallery. And, these people most of the time they just are looking out for you, and they do these things out of love, and they're just, worried about you. But with that said, it's really hard to move forward when you have so many different opinions, because those opinions a lot of the time aren't in alignment with what you think is right. And I try to teach my clients to, first of all, trust themselves, like trust their intuition. Like if they think that something is right and it will bring them joy or happiness or peace, like that's what they should do. Um, and, I try to help them give themselves permission to move forward and know that even if people around them don't agree with what they're doing, at the end of the day, they're the ones that are living their life and nobody else. And, if people really love you, they'll understand eventually, the decisions that you make and why. And honestly, it doesn't really matter because you're the one that's living your life. But that's really hard. And I think that is one of probably the main reason why people hesitate to do certain things after loss, because they're so afraid of other people disagreeing or having criticism to them and their new life and trying to create this new identity.
Hmm. I imagine that's a consistent theme, regardless of how someone has passed. But the interaction, particularly in a marriage, in a relationship like that, where you have in-laws and surviving family, that there must be, as you mentioned, kind of the inputs that you may not agree with, and that it's in most cases probably still important to maintain a relationship with the in-laws for the sake of the children or just for your own support, but at the same time set that boundary. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm not asking you to put your in-laws on blast, but did you, for your clients, do you have suggestions on how they interact in with those people, because I see a lot of parallels between whether a spouse passes in a line of duty death or passes from a medical emergency like your husband. They're essentially the same at that point. How can people create respectful boundaries?
Yeah, I think that really just comes down to communicating with whoever, you need the boundary with, and depending upon the situation, I think being open and honest and transparent, from like a widow or widower's perspective and dealing with in-laws or family, that's always the best thing. Timing is everything also. So being cognizant of like when you're bringing up things, like maybe wait, if it's like an anniversary, like if it's a heavy time, maybe waiting until that kind of passes. And but being transparent and honest and saying, hey, this is like kind of going to affect you, or like you need to know about this, like this is what I did, or this is what I'm thinking, like I hope you're happy for me, and I wanted to be cognizant of your emotions and how you're feeling. And I know this might be hard for you, but like, I love you, and, we can talk about it. And you know, if you need to talk about it with me, like we can talk about it, so leaving open that line of communication and being transparent, and just coming from a place of love, because you're not making these decisions to hurt other people. You're making these decisions for you, and
Hmm.
if you have kids, for your children. um and when you follow your heart, when you follow, your gut, I think, that's the most important thing. And that's where you really have to be guided by not other people's opinion. But yeah, I think just leaving open that line of communication is really important.
What I hear in that too is a lot of empathy, and you're
Yeah.
maintaining empathy for their experience, and the acknowledgement that they have lost someone too, and that it isn't just about you, but that you're very much in this together in a collective way. Speaking of transparent, open, and honest, you are very transparent, open, and honest on Instagram, where I found you, and you have garnered quite a large following of people. I'm curious about that ability, because I think it's something I sometimes lack, but that ability to be so open and honest and transparent on such a social platform where you're gonna get hate, especially with the number of followers you have. You're just gonna The
Mhm.
algorithm is gonna kick the hate out at you at times. What
Yeah.
and we'll get to some of that directly, but just to for yourself, what were the things, like what gave you the courage, the strength, the motivation to decide that this was something that you were going to pursue in such a social way?
Yeah, well, I think I didn't start sharing because, I at first I started sharing because it was out of like survival and necessity, because when Ryan's accident happened, everybody wanted updates and to see how Ryan was doing. So I used Facebook and social media as a way to update, like the law enforcement community as a whole, and family and friends, because I couldn't handle all of the text messages and calls and everything that were coming in. Like I couldn't do it, and I didn't have the time or energy. So it was a way to respect people wanting to know like what was going on, but also controlling the narrative, because it's really complicated when these things are happening. It's like always changing and fluid. So I started sharing Ryan's journey, and it just like blew up. I mean, the news started following it. There's so many people that were sharing my updates, and because I think that there were so many themes about life like intertwined with these updates, like resilience and hope and, tragedy and loss and grief and all the things that people go through on a daily basis that not a lot of people talk about so openly. And I think it resonated with so many people. So after Ryan died, and we had gone through so much, like so much crazy stuff that I didn't share about. And I was just thinking on the day that he died, like no one knows what this is like. Like no one shares, like I wasn't prepared, like no one shares this stuff. So that was kind of how the book came about, like the idea for the book. Um, but I thought, and then I started sharing my grief journey on Instagram. and all the other platforms. And I started, people started to pay attention, and because people started saying like, me too, I understand, like I resonate with that. Because not a lot of people share in such an intimate level all of these really complex emotions that are wrapped up in grief and tragedy, and even finding joy after loss and all of these things. And I was bringing light to things that people don't like to talk about because it's uncomfortable, and also because of the criticism that a lot of people get, because finding joy after loss shouldn't be like, people shouldn't be critical of it, but unfortunately people are really critical of it, because for some reason there are a group of people that think that if you find joy after loss, it's disrespectful to the spouse that died. And I want to show people that it's possible for you to find joy and purpose after loss. And I want to show people and give permission to people that it's okay to do that, that it's your right, and it's actually honoring your person instead of disrespectful. So, I thought that to be the most impactful, I had to be as transparent and vulnerable and honest as possible, because it loses something when you don't have that in it. People don't resonate with things if you don't give them all of the things that they want to hear or need to hear about the experience.
Yeah, so true. But then naturally there are going to be the negative people, not even the people who disagree with you, but the people who are just going to publicly or personally attack
Mm-hmm.
in a situation like that. How do you maintain your own equilibrium when you put stuff out there? Because I have similar experiences where I hit publish or send on something and I think, take a deep breath, or like this might
Yeah.
this is a little bit more than I'm outside my comfort zone with, but feel like it needs to be said. How do you just maintain that equilibrium for knowing that you're on the right path with this?
Yeah, I think at first, when I started getting my account started getting a lot of attention, and I started getting those people that were just being mean and saying things that were just so blatantly untrue, and just to be rude for no other reason. Um, you know, it's difficult because you're like, they don't even know me, but but like, it's not your responsibility to teach these people that they don't care about you, they just want to be rude. um and then, after a while, you start getting these messages and comments from people like that you're helping, and that so overshadows and overpowers those negative comments.
Hmm.
And now I just have stopped. Like, at first I responded to some of these, and it's not even worth my time, because these people are never they don't care about your response. They just want to get you riled up. They want to deter you from sharing, and that's their ultimate goal. And I'm not going to be deterred from my ultimate goal, which is to help other people going through tragedy and loss and trying to rebuild their lives, because that mission is way more powerful than any negative comment that doesn't even make sense most of the time, and that has no context. So
Hmm.
I understand the hesitancy to want to be vulnerable, but I think that's when everyone is agreeing with you, I feel like you're not reaching you're reaching no one. But when, like, you do have the haters, that's when you know you're being authentic to yourself and being truly vulnerable, because if you are being yourself, not everyone's going to like you. So I think that's actually the goal.
It's no secret that in the past few years, criminals and anti-police groups have gotten a lot more bold about challenging law enforcement officers. It's really scary because many of those groups have no problem showing up at an officer's house for protests or to try and intimidate the officer and their families. Even worse, it's easy for criminals to find your home address, and I actually have several partners and friends who have had violent felons show up at their front door after tracking them down on the internet. A lot of cops don't think about these things until they've been involved in a critical incident. New laws in many states require agencies to release the names of officers involved in shootings and uses of force, and it's not uncommon these days for cops to find the media at their front door the next morning. Don't wait until you're dealing with the aftermath of a critical incident to protect you and your family. Get it done today. And I highly recommend officerprivacy.com to help you wipe your name and your information from the top 50 people search sites on the web. Check out the special deal at officerprivacy.com/the squad room, where you'll get 2 free months of monitoring and data removal, plus a free cell phone privacy device when you sign up.
Oh, that's wonderfully said. I think that's a great perspective on that, because none of us are here to please everybody or to be everybody's cup of tea, but we have to be true to ourselves. Part of that is in, I cringe at this phrase, but I guess it's just, there's no more accurate phrase to it, but self-care and taking care of yourself during all of this that's going on. And in the immediate aftermath, there's obviously, you had 5 months of hospital visits and in and out of ICU, and then your 2 children, and the in-laws. There's just so many other people that need to be taken care of in some context. That, how did you begin to carve out time, or maybe you never had to carve it out, it was always there, but how do you maintain time for self-care in the things, and what is important to you in that mix? What do you use for self-care for that? Because I see that's a constant issue for cops and for spouses of cops as well.
Yeah, I think there's a time and place for self-care. So when we were in the thick of it in survival prior to Ryan's death. I mean, there was no self-care. I was pregnant and there was still no self-care. I mean, I did like the bare minimum. I went to my appointments just to like make sure like we were okay. But like, I mean, you don't take care of yourself. I was not sleeping. I was not eating correctly. From the time of Ryan's accident to the time I gave birth to my son, I only gained 3 pounds. Like, because stress is just ridiculous. I mean, the baby was fine. It all went to him. I just like was not like eating, or I was so stressed. Like, so you do the best you can under the circumstances. And sometimes it's like not great. There's like no self-care because it's just survival. And I think there's a time and place for that. But yeah, after Ryan died, I made it a point to get back to me. I was really into working out before Ryan's accident and doing all those self-care things, because I am very much I've always been into personal development and like being the best version of myself every day and doing all these things to make myself physically, emotionally, spiritually healthy for myself and my family. So number one, like getting back to working out again, like religiously, because I knew that would help me with my grief, number one, because I don't just intuitively, I know that working out just helps all the emotions and like getting the emotions out of me so I didn't have to carry them around. So working out, trying to eat normally again, and like nutritiously, like not surviving off of like protein bars and coffee and, alcohol, because, you do adopt some unhealthy habits when you're in the thick of it. And after my baby was born, like I used the alcohol to numb out because like I needed that. So but I knew that I couldn't use that as a crutch forever. And I know a lot of people in the police community, they use a lot of unhealthy habits like crutches to numb themselves sometimes, because it's just such a difficult thing to have to see all the things that they see every day. But kind of trading that for healthier things. I'm a big proponent of getting out in the sun. Like if you can combine movement, like working out with getting outside, I think that's amazing. Making sure I go to therapy regularly, making sure like I get to talk to somebody that can see me and I can witness my grief and be able like be a sounding board for me through this process. I think being around family and friends has been so beneficial for me after Ryan's death. Grief is just isolating in general, and it's something that you do by yourself. Like it's a journey that you have to take by yourself. Like no one else can grieve for you. But being in the presence of family and friends makes that process softer, if that makes sense.
Sure.
It just takes the edges off, to be surrounded by people you can laugh with and eat with and communicate with and even vent to. It just and cry with and all the things. So that has been really helpful for me.
You know, I want I want to get some of your grief coaching advice here on this next question, because it's something I see happen and I think about, and then I feel that I'm projecting when I'm interacting with someone who's experienced a loss like yours. And it's that I think people will often approach the person who's experienced this loss. They'll approach them with um, empathy, but it also like an overwhelming amount of sympathy, to the point that
Mm.
the person who's experienced a loss feels this weight on their shoulders every time these people come around. And they mean well, and they mean
Mhm.
they're trying to show a love for you or a care for you, but they almost look at you as with pity, really is what it is.
Mm.
And after a while that must become rather unbearable, and these might even be people you want in your life, that you just want them to change how they look at you. How do you approach that conversation with people to keep them in your life, but say, hey, I need something different from you?
Yeah, that's so hard because I'm so like the anti-victim, like and Ryan was too, like he hated like the victim mentality. You know, he was a hero, like literally. He like did all these amazing things during his career, like he saved so many people. Um, and you know, even on his darkest days, he never looked at himself as a victim. And you know, I think I carry that with me after Ryan's death. Like I never looked at myself like a victim. I never even asked myself why me, in terms of like why me in the general aspect. It was like, why not me? Like to trade places with Ryan. Um, so from the very beginning, you know, I was strategically thinking like, how can I find joy again? How can I get on the other side of this? But yes, other people, they project what, I guess, what they would feel in the same situation, which is it's a lot of pity, like the head tilt, like how you doing? And you know, that's really, it's hard and it's frustrating, and like it's okay to be angry about it, because no one, I don't think the majority of people don't want to look like or seem like a broken person. Like you're not broken just because you're grieving, and other people might look at you like this poor girl, or like pity. And I hated that. So what I try to do, and because I still get it, you know, 18 months after Ryan's accident, when I see people that haven't seen me in a while,
Mm.
I don't match their energy. Like I project my energy. So if someone's like, "Hey, like how you doing?" I'm like, "I'm great. Like how are you?" And I think that like brings them out of it, because they know like you're not matching their pity or their like low energy like hello to you.
Hmm.
And that usually does the trick, because they're like, "Oh, she's like okay." Or like she doesn't want to, maybe that they're like, oh, she doesn't like want to talk like how I'm talking. So you'll see like when people start mirroring what you are putting out into the world. So if you mirror them, obviously like the pity party is going to start, and they'll probably ask a lot of questions. But if you don't match their energy, like they'll start talking about other stuff like normal. And I just want to be normal. Like I don't want people to look at me like I'm a victim or have pity on me. Like I just want to be Whitney. Like what, you know, why don't you ask me how I'm doing, like how my kids are doing, just like normal life.
That's fantastic advice. To just to not match the energy. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've ever heard someone in 170 something episodes explain something like that when dealing with people who are can be challenging, and that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about how many of your followers, the people who reach out to you, your clients, how many are families in law enforcement or first responder families? Is that a significant part of your group, or is it really just that grief is universal and this is just happens to be your story?
Yeah, I think it's a really good mix of both, because I think people find me, I don't even know, like, because I do use, I guess, hashtags like, I do use some like law enforcement hashtags, because I think it's so important. Like the connection between law enforcement and grief is so big. And, I think I'll always have that connection to the law enforcement community and to Ryan's police department and the canine community. And I want to help those people that, other Leo wives that might be going through something similar. And I've had so many police wives reach out to me with things that have happened with their husbands too. And even police officers themselves, men and women, have reached out to me and said that Ryan's story has impacted them. So, I think it's a lot of both. Mm-hmm.
Mm. Yeah, it's such a, grief. We're talking specifically, we've been talking about grief in the context of losing someone very close to you, a husband, a wife. But I think what is sometimes unique to the first responder communities is that we are surrounded by it even when it's not our own loss. I can't tell you how many death notifications I've done in my career because I lost count. And at my agency, we are also coroners. And so I can't tell you how many times I've just been absolutely surrounded by death, which also brings with it the automatic co-response of grief, and it not always mine, but family members, strangers, people I don't even know. But to sit in that room with that kind of grief over and over and over again begins to weigh very heavily on the first responder. And I think we're only at a point now where we're starting to understand that the constant exposure to grief, even if it's not yours, becomes your grief, right? And that when your days are surrounded by grief like this, it becomes very hard for some people, for some first responders, to do the things that you've been talking about doing, about finding joy and then feeling guilty about feeling joyful because we know how fragile life is. And so I think that if someone's listening to this and they're not experiencing a loss directly to themselves, look at the context of the grief you've experienced in your career and that you see on a daily basis, that you are forced to interact with, and understand that that is still very real. And it is very impactful on your life in ways that you probably aren't recognizing, and that these priorities of self-care that we were talking about have to be part of your toolbox in order to just get through the career. Absent loss of your own, just to get through the career, this grief is still there. I don't have any perspective on that. I'd love for you to chime in on that.
Yeah, well, as you're talking, I'm just thinking about, because, I'm a grief coach, so I'm kind of purposefully putting myself in the position to hear about other tragedies and other people's grief, like on a daily basis. And, I get hundreds of messages every day, and people just want to feel witnessed in their grief. So, the messages I receive, they're heartbreaking, honestly, like
Mm-hmm.
every day. And I think it's so important, like you said, like it's like the self-care, obviously, like doing all those things to that make you have like an armor around yourself almost,
Sure.
because it makes it possible for you to compartmentalize better. I think the only reason I can do what I do and not kind of like let my own grief creep in, because obviously when people are talking about their grief and loss, and when they're like surrounded by it, how can you not like think about your own grief? But I I do it, and it's because I'm able to compartmentalize. And I think it's because that like mental fortitude that I've built up from all of the work that I have done through therapy, through physical exercise, through journaling, through writing, through all of these things to process my own grief. I can take on someone else's grief for an hour and I can let it go.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a dance. Like I think it's not a very easy thing to do, compartmentalizing, like releasing other people's grief. Like I know a lot of like medical people have to go through that too, because they see death and loss on a day-to-day basis. And at the end of the day, like you gotta you gotta let yourself feel some of the feelings, but you also have to know when it's time to move on, because it's not your loss. And that's hard, because you're human, but it's kind of practicing that compartmentalization, but that
Mhm.
it's like the shield is built through the self-care and all the things that you do for yourself to be physically, mentally, and emotionally and spiritually, almost like protected and peaceful and have your own peace.
Sure. You know, in relation to that too, what are some of the things you recommend for people? Like how can people be supportive or good stewards of someone who is navigating a loss like this? We've talked about not
Mhm.
bringing that uh, overly sympathetic or pity energy in, but what are some of the other things that we may not think about as being important, or tone, or how we approach? For example, uh, I have a I am trying to change the way I ask when someone might be struggling or might have challenges or issues, instead of changing it from "Do you need anything" to "Do you want anything?" And trying to watch my language around need, because our natural reaction is to be strong, to be stoic, say, "I don't need anything. I'm going to do this by myself. I'll grit it by my teeth." But I sure would want some support. The difference between want and need, I guess, is a little bit, and that language there is becoming more and more important to me. But what are some of the things you recommend for people who might interact with a coworker who's, a cop on the beat whose wife is struggling with cancer, or maybe has passed as a result, or a sudden heart attack, or all the different things that might happen? How can we be better stewards of each other?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I know when I was going through the worst days of my life, it was impossible to even know what I needed or wanted. But the things that helped me, because obviously, you gotta eat, you gotta rest, like you have to do all these things. So it's like other people making the space for you to do those things. So like honestly, like someone bringing me a meal that they know I would just like with a coffee at the hospital without even asking me what I wanted, just bringing it to me, like was the best thing ever because I didn't have to think about what I wanted. Like I didn't have to make any other decisions because all of my decisions were like life and death decisions. And like I had no capacity to even like give a lunch order. Like that's how much in survival mode I was. I mean, that's just an example, but you know, instead of asking what you need or want, just showing up with something that you know will be helpful, like gift cards or a meal. Um, or, in your case, like instead of being like, I know you're really struggling, maybe a list of mental health professionals or like groups instead of the other person having to do that because they're likely not going to take the time to do it for themselves. So, like, kind of literally spoon feeding these really helpful things to people because when you're in it, you don't know what you need, you don't know what you want, you don't want to have to make decisions, and you don't want to have to research. So, showing up with these tangible things is so helpful. Um,
Mhm.
it was really beautiful and people would just on hospice, like we had a meal train, like we didn't have to think about where our meals were coming from. People brought like presents for the boys, which was really kind and generous, and like clothes for them. So I didn't, because I couldn't like go shopping for them. So things like that, and just like coming over and doing a load of laundry, like that was so helpful to me because it freed up space for me to deal with the things that were really important. Because all of those things still, like life goes on even when you're going through tragedy and loss, and like these things have to get done, and they're the things that don't get done. So having people show up in that way, like childcare, so I could like take a shower or something. Those are the ways that were the most helpful for me.
You're obviously a very driven person. You're an attorney. You were practicing before his death. You have taken on this new role. You're full speed of that. With, I'm guessing, this is purely a guess, but with that personality of someone who is driven like that, it can be hard to accept help, and
Mm,
to just be open to it, but also accept it without making yourself feel like you're a failure because you, quote unquote, should be able to handle this.
hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think eventually everyone realizes no one should be expected to handle something like that and raising
Yeah.
a child while pregnant. But was that part of your struggle, or what did you eventually navigate towards in finding your calm with that?
Yeah, I did struggle with that because, like you said, I want to, especially after Ryan's accident when it was just me, like I wanted to be able to do all of the things. And I was doing all the things, but, um, I think I was just so much in survival that I kind of gave up the ghost at a point and was just like, I didn't even care because, like,
Mm.
just receiving the help was so like wonderful and I just couldn't do it. And then, I had a baby during while Ryan was in the hospital. So, and I had a C-section. So like physically I couldn't move. Like, so I had to break down a lot of my walls and because I physically couldn't do anything, I couldn't get food for myself. Like I was in pain for like a month. Um, so my mother-in-law moved in and was sleeping like on my pull-out sofa and that was kind of hard for me because I wanted to be able to just take care of everything. But I think it's just like in releasing a lot of those expectations of yourself and knowing that these people are showing up for you because they love you and they want to help you with nothing, expecting nothing in return. And I think that's really beautiful to just, I think those like extreme because not everyone's going to have a C-section during like this traumatic event, but I had to have help. So it almost was like shock therapy for me to allow other people to help me.
Mm.
And I
Mhm.
think, I think that I needed that. Um, and coming out of that, I think now it's still hard for me to ask for help because I am physically capable and mentally capable of doing all the things. And, sometimes I hit a wall and I'm like, this is too much. And like I still have trouble asking for help and I'm in therapy. So like that's something I'm working on. I'm always gonna be a person that's trying to be the best version of myself to find peace and joy and happiness, as close to that I possibly can be.
Sure.
But yeah, I am that's like it's like a forever, I think that's gonna be like a forever challenge for me is to ask for help.
Another forever challenge I anticipate or I see, and it's probably the most impactful thing I see at a police funeral or anything like that is the children and
Mm.
seeing them navigating this too. What is your advice for people who have children like yourself, young, and at least in the case of your youngest, too way too young to understand what has transpired or what occurred? How do you recommend people have those conversations throughout their children's lives? Because I think
Mhm.
they certainly see everything, they feel everything, and there may be a tendency to not to want to talk about it. But I don't know. I don't think that would be very productive. What do you suggest to people?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing would suggest because this is what I did is know that you don't know what you don't know, and if you need
Mm.
to seek like professional advice about how to navigate, especially the grief of a child, like reach out. Don't think that you can do like everything on your own. These are the type of things where I knew I couldn't maybe navigate on my own, and like intuitively, the right things to do. But it's also comforting to have somebody tell you that you're doing the right things. So when Ryan was preparing to be on hospice, and on hospice, we spoke to a child psychologist about how to talk to my oldest son Jackson because obviously the baby didn't know what was going on, about what was happening and what it would mean for him and all the things. And she told me what I intuitively knew as a mother was just be honest and transparent and tell him in the most literal way what was going on because he was 4 years old at the time. And 4-year-olds are literal. If you ever talk to a 4-year-old, like they will tell you the honest truth. So that's what I did. And I had to be extremely literal with him about death and what was going on with his dad. Um, to the, to the point where it's very painful because adults don't talk like that. We talk in euphemisms. We like to make everything sound better than it is because it's painful for us. And you can't do that with a toddler or or a little boy. You just can't. Um, so I asked for help, and we had a very hard conversation for me, and my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were there. So I asked for support on their end. Um, so Jackson knew what was going on, but it's a forever process. And as he starts to become more aware of the impact, and like what actually happened and the permanency of death, because a 4-year-old doesn't really understand, but I think he's starting to understand what death means and what the permanency of death. I'm going to have to explain these things over and over again in a developmentally appropriate way. And then, as Leo starts growing up, I'm going to have to do the same thing with him. But his experience is going to be different because he never met Ryan. So he doesn't have any memories of him where Jackson still does. And I hope he always does. He has such a good memory. I don't know if those memories are going to go away or not. They might. But he really has a very solid memory of Ryan.
Hmm. I think it's fantastic advice. You eventually wrote a book about this experience, running in trauma stilettos. It's available on Amazon, right? That process of writing the book, I just want to quickly ask about that. The decision to write a book. What was the impetus to that?
Yeah, I think it was, on the day that Ryan died, I realized that no one knows really what happens in grief and trauma. We don't like to talk about it. We talk about it behind closed doors, but we don't really talk about um, just the raw array of emotions that people go through in grief. I wasn't prepared for all of the emotions that I felt going through this process. How it wouldn't just be like sadness and despair. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of resentfulness that you feel, and it surprised me. And just the events themselves were so raw and real. I felt like I needed to write a book for those that were going through a similar experience, although, obviously it wouldn't be the same, but to make people feel like they weren't alone in going through the hardest days of their life. So and also to give them hope that even if you're going through a really hard time and these horrible things that life throws at you, there's still always a light. And, if you're courageous enough to try to pull yourself out of the deepest, darkest hole, that, you can find joy again, and you can find, you can live again.
It's a perfect place to end our conversation today, Whitney. Thank you so much. Can you share with people where they can find out more about you, find out where they can get the book, learn more about your coaching?
Yeah, sure. So you can get my book, Running in Trauma Stilettos, on Amazon, by Whitney Lynn Allen with one N in Lynn. And then my website is whitneylynnallen.com if you're interested in grief coaching. And you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and TikTok at Whitney Lynn Allen.
We'll put all the links for all of those in the show notes. So if you're driving or in your podcast player, you can just scroll through the show notes and click the links there to find out more about Whitney's work. Whitney, thank you so much for being with us today. It was a great conversation about a lot of things. And I think the biggest thing I'm taking away from this is this idea of matching energy and then, maintaining this, that we aren't victims, that we still have opportunities to grow, opportunities to experience joy, that it's never going to be a perfect process, but we have the opportunity out there. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you're new to the show, make sure you check through our catalog of episodes because you're going to find some amazing guests and some great actionable ideas you can take into your day. Also, I want to offer you something I'm very excited about, and it's absolutely free. It's my Tactical Tuesday newsletter. Every Tuesday, I want to bring you a few tactics, tips, and strategies to help you succeed in the week ahead. It may be a book I want to share, some gear I found useful, an inspiring quote, or anything else I think you'd like. To sign up for the Tactical Tuesday email list, you can visit thesquadroom.net/Tactical Tuesdays, or just text your email address to 805-364-2331. That's 805-364-2331. If you didn't catch that, check the show notes for this episode, and you can find it there. And I promise we won't sell or spam your email address. Before we wrap up, I have a challenge for you. If you got something out of this episode, if you were inspired by our conversation today, I want to challenge you right now to take a photo of your podcast player as you're playing this episode, and I want you to share it with 3 friends, people who you think need to hear what we talked about today. Send them this episode and recommend that they listen to it. Also, please consider leaving a review on the podcast player of your choice. If you have a few seconds, please leave a comment with your review because it really helps us spread the word about the show and it helps more cops find the valuable lessons that we have here. Also, join us on Facebook at our Facebook group, follow our page, and on Instagram at The Squad Room. A special thanks to today's sponsor, OfficerPrivacy.com. If cleaning up your name on the internet and making it harder for criminals to find you is important, check them out at OfficerPrivacy.com/The Squad Room, where their deal for you as a listener of this show is they'll give you a free USB data blocker and 1 month of free monitoring when you sign up. I want to thank our sponsor for this episode, InTime. InTime is the state-of-the-art, easy-to-use, and incredibly simple way to schedule shifts, improve subpoena compliance, reduce officer fatigue, and manage special events, and much more. Make sure to check them out at intime.com/The Squad Room to learn more about their affordable and simple solutions for public safety. Also, there are some other great companies who support the podcast and support you as well. Go to thesquadroom.net/support to see exclusive deals from Signature Coins, Hard to Kill Fitness, Onnit, Ranger Up, Hardhead Veterans, and Audible. And if you're looking for the best-fitting ballistic helmet that exceeds NIJ standards and won't break the bank, check out hardheadveterans.com and use the coupon code SQUADROOM to get $20 off your helmet. All right, until next time, take care of each other and stay safe.